Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Bava Metzia daf Sadi Ches. We are going to begin on Sadi Ches with Aleph, the third line from the top. So, we ended off on somewhat of a middle of the sugya. We were learning in our Mishnah on Sadi Zayin with Aleph that if you have a shoyl for part of the time and a soicha for part of the time, he borrows for, let's say, half a day and rents for half the day. And in this situation, what happened was the animal died. So we know that by shoyl, you're chai b'oinsin, by a soicher, you're not. So therefore, obviously, the mashil is going to want to claim that it died while it was being borrowed, and therefore he's chayiv. And he's bori about that. He's certain. And then you have the person who actually borrowed and rented, and he says, any day, I don't know. So our Mishnah said that you're chayiv. So according to one explanation, it's because bar b'shema bar yadav. Since the mashil is confident and the shoyl or the soicher was not sure, so we say that he's chayav to pay. Now, there is an opinion of manu b'yadcha v'lo yemeni yodeya. According to Shita Rabbi Nachman, he says that the din is you are potter. He does not hold the bar b'shem bar yadav. Rather, he applies the principle of uki mamoyne b'cheskes mari. So it seems like Rabbi Nachman's not like our Mishnah. So we ended up in yesterday's daf saying, no, we're talking about a case of our Mishnah is that there was an asik shvua. Namely, that there was a shvua that was placed upon him, namely a moed b'mixas atayna. That the person who borrowed said, 50 I know, I owe you. The other 50 I don't know. Shar in Yodea. So there's a din, he has a chiv shvua, min ha-Torah, being moed b'mixas, and since he can't make that shvua, he has to pay. And therefore, that's the reason why our Mishnah is talking about a case where he'd have to pay, where normally he would not have to, according to Rabbi Nachman. So now we have to understand the case of the Mishnah, which is basically where we left off, but now we have to understand the actual cases of our Mishnah. So, Mishkachas lo reisha b'beis v'sefer b'gimel. The way to understand our Mishnah is that the ratio of our Mishnah was 2 cows, and the Seifa is 3. So let's understand this. Ratio base. The Armale base paras masartilcha. I gave you 2 cows. Palga diyayim b'sheila. Half of the day was for a borrowing agreement. Upalga diyayim b'schirus. And the other half was renting. Inami, alternatively, similar to what our Mishnah said, it was split in a day itself. Half a day this, half a day that. Umesu turvayu. And both of these animals died, and now the maskir is going to say it was be'idan she'ela. It was at the time when they were being borrowed. And therefore you are chayav. So this is the case. He's saying 100% you owe me for the 2 cows, because they died at the time in which it was she'ela. The Armuleh, so the shoyl says, chad in, be'idin she'ela. It's true. One of the animals did in fact die during the time in which it was borrowed, and therefore I'm 100% chayav to pay you for one of them. I'm moed b'mixas. I admit for one of these animals. However, and therefore she'ela mesa, it definitely died, therefore I'm chayav b'oinis. The second cow lo yadana. I'm not sure if the second one I'm not sure about. So it sounds like a case of bar b'shema. Now again, Rav Nachman doesn't hold bar b'shema bar yadav. But the reason why that he would be chayiv over here is to be tashin yochel shalom shalom. It's just because he's mechuyev a shvua, and since he can't make a shvua, he has to pay. The seifa, and the way we'd understand, according to Rav Nachman, the seifa of our Mishnah is begimel. That he rented 3 cows. The Armale, the masker says, Gimel Pars Nasatocha, I gave you 3. Beish Eila, 2 of them were borrowed, but Achas Beschirus, and 1 was a rental. Umesu and Hanitarti, there was 2 of them that died. 2 of the 3 animals died. And the 2 that died were the She'ela, were the borrowed ones. The Armale Shoyl, and the Shoyl says, in. You're right. One of these 2 cows that died was the borrowed one, therefore I definitely have to pay for that. The other one I don't know. If it died while if it was the one that died was the borrowed one. Udekaimba the schirasi, and the one that's alive is the rented one. E the schiris mesa b'ha the kaima. The she'elahi the mitashin yachol shalom shalom. So again, so here it's not a question of Rab Nachman, and that's how he'll establish our Mishnah. Now, not everyone holds this is enough to be chayav shvuah, as we've seen in Bava Kama, as well as the beginning of this Masechta. Or Rabbi Bar Chama Yom Dalad Shaimer, when it comes to the case of the Shaimer Sacher Shamachinam, the Seich and the Shayel, Srichin Kvir Mixas V'Hoidel Mixas. He actually has to be kaifer for one aspect completely. He has to say Lahadam, Lo Hayu Davarim Oilim for one of them. So basically, what we have to do is up the animals from 2 to 3 and from 3 to 4, respectively, and one of them he has to say Lahadam. And that's basically what this rest of the Mishnah is going. The rest of this is going to say. Mishkachas lo reish begimel v'seiv v'dalad. Reish begimel di'ermalei gimel parsa sadocha. So the lender, the mashil or the maskir, says that I gave you 3 cows. Half of the day borrowing, half for renting. Half the day was renting, half the day was borrowed. So all 3 of them died at the time of borrowing. And therefore you owe me for all 3. The Armalei Shayel, and the borrower says, again, you have to have kfir b'mixas. You have to completely deny entirely, and this is according to Rabbi Bar Chama. So by one he says lahadam, and therefore that's one I completely deny. That's not true at all. L'chad in one I agree, be'idan she'ela mesa, that it died when it was borrowed, and therefore I have to pay you that. Be'idach liyadana, be'idan she'ela mesa, be'idan schiris mesa, b'tel she'en yachol l'shon l'shon. That's the reason I have to pay. Seifa is now bedalad. Yermoi dalad paris in the sati l'cha. The maskir, the mashal says, it was 4. Gimel b'she'ela chad b'schiris. 3 of them were borrowed and 1 was rented. Umesu hanach gimel, 3 of them died. The 3 of them that died, all 3 of the 4 died. 1's alive, but the ones that died were all dishe'el, were all borrowed. If you have to pay me back all 3. The Yermalays would continue to Sadi Chesma Beis. Shayel, the Shayel will say chad lahadam. 1, no, lo hayu devar ma'oylam. I'm totally be kaifer on that. The chada in the she'ela mesa, and therefore I have to pay for that one. The idach, but the other one will yadana either schiris mesa or the kaim de she'ela, or the she'ela mesa, the kaim de schiris. I don't know which of this third animal, if it was the borrowed or the rented. Okay, question 2. Tanan sachar achas v'shol achas umeso hamashol oimer she'ula mesa v'lo oimer en yodeh chayiv b'may kimta babazu b'gemayra b'oifen the chayiv b'lib the kuli alma. So then again you have to say it's a case of kfir b'mixas. Okmina b'gemar b'dalad paros nasato chagi before gimel b'she'ela v'chad b'schiras umeso hanach gimel d'she'ela. So again the lender or the renter, the mashal, says that they were all the 3 that died were all borrowed, and the other guy, the shal, says for one of them was lahadam. One of them he admits yes I do, and the other one he says I don't know, and therefore since he's not able to make a shvuah, he would have to pay. Okay, so that's basically that. Okay, let's see what is TB24. She'el hayom v'sachal machar hamashal aimer b'yoyim shahaysa she'ula meisa v'lo aimer en yodeh chayb kama paris mishkachas l'sheish esek shula derais v'nehem l'chamitay shenechol shava. This is what I wrote. O gimel o dalid im sarach gam kvir b'mixas v'hayda b'mixas sarach dalid. Okay, and let's see what I wrote. Echad lo hayda b'ma'olam kvir b'mixas ve'echad shehu mayda shehu chayiv ve'echad en yodeh mitay shenechol shava shalom. Absolutely beautifully written. Okay, that's Sadi Ches. Let's just call that Sadi Ches Aleph Aleph, which is pretty similar to question 2, and we'll call that TB. That's TB24. Okay. All right, that's excellent. Let's see if TA question TA24. Manu biyadch v'aloy moed b'chamishim beis oifen amrinan. Mem shin aleph yud lam and mem mitoshin yachol shel mishalim. Why would they have to put that acronym? Mem Shin Aleph Yud Lamed Mem. It's not found anywhere in the Gemara, but you're supposed to just understand that means Mitoy Shein Yachal L'Shel Mishalom. When you're in the middle of taking a 30-block test, you just have to remember that. That's probably what that Rashi Teva stands for. Not understanding that. So Rava b'chamishim yadana b'chamishim lo yadana. Rava b'chama b'chamishim yadana b'chamishim b'chil kaifer b'omer hadam b'chil kaimer lo yadana. Okay. So it's a similar question. It's just talking about whether or not you need, again, kfir b'mixus, hoidam mixus, kfir b'mixus, or it's not necessary. That's 20. That's TA 24. That is a really, really hard question. Just understanding what the question is. Okay. But that's what it takes. Take a 30-block test. You have to know your stuff. Okay. All right. So now we continue to dissect the rest of the Mishnah. Ze oimer sh'ulav, ze oimer schura. Yeshava seicha sh'schura mesa. So over here you have a case of a bari and a bari. Now one person says that it died when it was borrowed, and therefore you're chayav to pay me back. And the borrower says no, it died during the time it was rented, and therefore I'm potter. So therefore he has to make a shvuah. Why is he chayav a shvuah? That they're not the same thing. Says Rashi. Even if we establish the case that he was kaifer and he admitted, Hani Mili Rav Nachman, that's only according to Rav Nachman. You must nisan Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, Tani V'Yamai Yeshava, Harain Kan Hoidem Mixus. There's no case of being Hoidem Mixus. There's no Chiv Shvuah over here. It shouldn't be a Chiv Shvuah. So why does he have to make a Shvuah? There's no being Hoidem Mixus. Again, according to the understanding of Bari Bari, so why would he be Mechuyev to make a Shvuah? Or Me'ula, Alidei Gilgal. You're right. He really doesn't have a chiyuv midiraisa, but as we went out from the din of saita, amen. So therefore, because of that, he brought down Gemara Kedushin, of course, from Masechta Sota, that once there's a chiyuv shvuah, then you could, for other things, you can tack on other shvuahs. What is the gilgal? The Amalei ishtabali ezumias tikadarka mesa. At least make a shvuah that it died in a normal way. Now that is a real legitimate shvuah. Umigudi ishtabak the kadarka mesa. Once you make a shvuah that it died in a normal way, ishtabak nami the skora mesa. It's a very interesting take on that. Question 3. This is what he asks. Sachar achas v'shol achas zemer shula mesa zemer skora mesa. B'ma yachal b'habayis li shabiyah midaraisa. Uman di omer ir parshius kasav kan. It's interesting. It says it that way. So Yeshava Shvua Sashayimrim Shikadarka Mesa Megalgal of Shua Saskora Mesa. So let's look at this Rashi over here. Ishtabali Ezemias Afil he Sachor Yeshli Alecha Shvua Shekain who Kibrecha. Delays led Rama Barcham the boy Kfir Bahida Bashayim the Sfil and Commandier Ir Parshas Kasav Khan. The Chi Kasav Ki Huzeh, when it says Ki Huzeh, it's Al Milvahu the Ksiv. That when it comes to the loan, when you lend money, there's a chiyuv shvuah. The gilul shvuah min atayrahi miva amr ha'isha amen amen, as we said in Masechta Sota. So the truth is that it's questionable whether or not there's a din of kfir b'mixus or hoidem b'mixus is required, whether you say ir parshas kasav kan. In other words, whether it's talking about a milva or b'kadain. Okay. So you have a shema and a shema. So we say split it. As we are familiar. They split it according to sumchas whenever you're in doubt. So boy Rav Bar Mumble. So now we're going to conclude this short daf with a multitude of questions. Sha'ala b'bayilim. Let's say it's borrowed and rented. It's kind of here in the middle, both. Now, what happens if you borrow it with the services of the owner? And we know that even when this happens, if the baal is imoi, he's potter. And sachra shelo b'baal. Then afterwards you rent it without the baal there. Mahu. It says Rashi, koydem shechzira, before you return the item that you borrowed, chaz v'sachar mina, you rented it from him. Ubeshas chiraso lo hayima b'malachtai. V'nigna avda b'meschirus. They got lost or stolen during that time. Do we say that it's considered to be connected to the original agreement, that since at the original she'ela bal imoi, so even though now schirus, he wasn't there, maybe he's still going to be potter for Gneva Vaveda. So mi amrin and she'ela chuda kaima schirus chuda kaima. Do we say that they're all separate? And Rashi says umilsa chritihi. They're completely like separate business arrangements, and therefore mechayvli the mishas schirus b'rshuso haisa ushlo b'bayilim he was without the baal there, and therefore b'chayvel dilma schirus b'shel meshach shaychi. Maybe we should say that the renting is just a continuation of the borrowing agreement, and therefore daha mechayv b'gneva aveda, because after all, now we see that when it comes to this case, he's chayav b'gneva aveda, which is the same thing when it comes to a shoyel. Shoyel is chayav b'gneva aveda. So too when it comes to a seicher. So therefore, since there's commonality, there's common ground between the two, maybe we should say they're potter. And therefore, since at the time of the borrowing, the baal was imoy, so maybe it'd be potter. If you want to tell me that the rental was a continuation of the borrowing, so what if it's the other way around? What if, let's say, during the rental agreement, which took place first, the baal was imoy, and then before you gave it back upon the end of the rental agreement, you borrowed it, but it was shelo b'bayil. Mahu sheil b'schirus v'adil shaykh. So over here, what's happening is now that you're borrowing it, you now have a higher level of responsibility, because you are chayav gneva aveda, and now all of a sudden you have additional responsibilities of chiyuv for borrowing it. So therefore, maybe you would be chayav in this situation. Since we say that there was some continuation between the two, because you do have some she'elo b'mixas, let's say you're both chayav b'pshia, so therefore, and you're both chayav gneva aveda, even though it's going the opposite direction, you're being more chayav. So maybe it's not a continuation, but again, maybe we do say, since it's a partial continuation, it's linked to the original rental agreement, which was b'balim, they'd be potter. And therefore, you would be chayav. So shol b'balim, what happens again if you borrow it with the baal there? The sachar shol b'balim, which maybe we say doesn't work. The chazer v'sholo, but then you borrowed again, mahu. So hadar asile she'ela l'duchta. Do we say that since you originally borrowed it with the baal there, even though there was something in the between, but now you're back to the original borrowing, so therefore it's considered like the baal was there. Odilma afsika la schirus beni veni. Since there was the rental agreement in between, the renting, borrowing, so therefore the second borrowing cannot be linked back to the original borrowing, and therefore if it gets if something happens to it, then you be chayiv. Sachar b'balim, let's say it was rented with the baal. The shol v'chaz v'sachar mahu. So let's say it was rented, borrowed, then rented. So mi amrinan asila schiras l'duchta. Again, the rental stays in its place, and therefore, since the original rental was b'balim, you'd be potter, even though there was something in between. Oh, dilma nafsikala she'ela beni veni teiku. Maybe again the fact that there was the borrowing in the between that breaks up the two schiras. So even though the original schiras was b'balim, since the second one is not b'balim, therefore maybe it would be chayiv. In all these cases, we conclude with the Gemara saying teiku adkan.